Most of us want to be in this one state, which is just connectivity and calmness and peace. That's where we'd love to live. But typically, especially if we have trauma that we haven't dealt with, something will set us off, a trigger that will get us into fight or flight mode or freeze and fawn mode.
Hey, journeyers. Welcome to the Journey to Launch podcast. I have on a special returning guest who has been on the podcast before and is coming back to share more of her insights and her journey since she's been on the show. I'll link that in the show notes, by the way. But today I have Jessica Moorhouse, who is a sought-after money expert, TV personality, and speaker. She's an accredited financial counselor in Canada and an award-winning financial content creator and host of the chart-topping More Money podcast, which I had the pleasure of being on. Her
Twice,
book,
I think.
Twice. I can't believe it was twice.
I think so.
Her book, Everything But Money, The Hidden Barriers Between You and Financial Freedom, is out right now. I'm so excited to have you back on the podcast, Jessica.
Thanks for having me. I was actually thinking, like, have I been on your show? It must have been a while because
it was a while, and I have to pull up the number, and I'll definitely link. The,
I
show
couldn't
notes.
tell you.
Yeah, it was probably in the beginning of the podcast, and we're over 400 episodes in. I think even remember. I think your podcast was already out before I had my podcast, I believe.
Yeah.
So you've been doing this for a while too.
It'll be 10 years in June. Isn't that crazy?
Oh yeah, you definitely would do it. Like I think I'm on. I started in 2017, so you know.
So you're up there. Yeah, that's just 2 years before me. Yeah,
I know. There. Oh my gosh. So I'm excited to have you back on because a lot has changed. You know, I will link your episode because I typically, if you came on that early, we talked about your origin story and probably getting out of debt and starting your podcast and business. But now we're at like a totally different evolution of Jessica and your career and life. Yeah. And you have a new book. Out.
I mean, I remember I was so excited to have you on my show to talk about your book. I'm like, oh, wouldn't that be amazing if I ever got the opportunity? And it just took a few more years for me. And I'm so excited to be on here to talk about it. And let me tell you, it was definitely a different book than I expected to write. So I think a lot of people who maybe have listened to that, original episode of You and Me, gosh, I don't even know what we would have talked about. Like what were we talking about back then? But this book really... it was a bit of a departure for me because it isn't a practical how-to money book, which is what I expected to write, and I think everyone else expected me to write. But ultimately, it became a book that is about everything but money. So it's really at the core of it is being a financial counselor, but also a content creator for over a decade, like 12 or 13 years by this point. What I realized was most people consume all this amazing, free or paid financial education. And they still sometimes come to me. They're like, I'm still not doing the thing. I'm still not seeing any progress. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. And so I want to write a book about what are some of those hidden barriers preventing you from getting ahead when it's not a financial literacy issue and it's not an income or a money issue. You've got money, you have the education, you're still messing up, you're still like making mistakes and you don't know why. I explore all the different possible reasons for why that is.
That is necessary. I love the tagline. No, seriously, because I like the tagline and what you just mentioned, the hidden barriers between you and financial freedom, because so much of it is intangible in a way. Like there are all these tangible things we're trying to achieve with money. And we might be checking the boxes in our certain aspects of our lives, whether it's, maybe we partnered and we have a job and we maybe are contributing to our 401k, but there's life that's happening. There are our own emotions and history and feelings that really color everything that we do. So I want you to talk a little bit about, let's kind of take it to your evolution.
Yeah.
Like with money. So you've been doing this for a long time now. And I guess I could say that I've been doing this for quite some time too.
Yeah.
And, I will assume based on kind of what you said that your relationship with money is not perfect or the way you interact, because it's not with me either. And I think that's
it's not with any financial content creator I've ever met. There's a reason we got into this, you know what I mean?
Exactly. And so I want to talk there because maybe like sharing your story and evolution and what you were struggling with will help the listeners, the journeyers.
Yeah. I mean, I honestly thought before I started writing this book and doing a lot of introspection that my relationship with money wasn't perfect, but it was fine. Like I look back and, I never had a debt situation. And so I felt like, oh, great. I never had to deal with that kind of trauma and that kind of struggle. And I've been pretty good with money my whole life. And I don't everything on the surface, everything looked pretty fine. I, can't complain kind of thing. And then when I started writing the book and doing a lot of research and interviews and therapy, and talk about that in the book near the end, I realized actually I have a very unhealthy relationship with money. It's always been a negative in my life, in that although, again, on the surface, everything looked fine. And even when I look at the numbers, I'm fine. Everything's fine. I never felt like I was good enough. I never felt like I could get enough. No matter what I achieved, it always felt like I missed the mark. And so I was very unsatisfied with who I was. And also, I didn't realize how tied my personal identity was to my financial situation, but also my career. And that's one of the biggest blessings out of writing this book. I really got to realize I actually don't really like how my life is. Again, online, on the surface, it looks like, wow, this is a great life. And it is in comparison to, I think, a lot of other people's situations. But I was actually very unhappy, very lonely, very, I didn't like myself very much. And a lot of that had to do with my connection, my relationship with money. And so for me, I had to, and we talk about this in the book, really, write out my money story. What is the narrative in connection with money that I've been telling myself up until this point, from childhood to adulthood? And what are the good parts and what are the bad parts? What are the things that are really I struggle with negative self-talk, and a lot of it has to do with money. I'm not earning enough compared to, you go online and someone's always doing better than you, or I should have more money in the bank, or I can't believe you didn't retire by 35, all these things. There could always be a point where you could be doing better. And which means no matter what you do, you're never satisfied with your life. You never feel fulfilled. And so you're just constantly pushing that goalpost ahead. And I realized I don't want to live like that, because that's miserable. And especially as I'm in my late 30s, approaching 40, it really dawned on me that I don't want to enter that next decade, which I think is a very important decade, your 40s, when you are a little bit more stable, you're more confident. There's a lot of great things to look forward to in your 40s. I'm like, I don't want to bring this version of myself into my 40s. I really don't. And so I, wrote this book for me, but for everyone else who feels the exact same way, that they're not happy with the narrative they've been telling themselves up until this point. They want a new story. And so we need to break that one down and really understand, where do these things come from? So then we can leave the stuff that's not serving us, and then, keep the things that are, so we can move forward.
How did that show up? So I understand the feelings that you're describing, about maybe seeing or thinking you should be further ahead. But I guess, can you maybe describe in more vivid detail a bit, like how it showed up in your life on a day-to-day basis? Because I think a lot of people experience this, but they don't know what it is. They don't know that they're unhappy because of that. Yeah. So what did it look like for you?
Well, so it really came to a head, and I talk about this in the introduction, in the holiday season 2022. I had just had a meeting with this publisher, pitched a very different book proposal, which they're like, yeah, we don't love that. Can you rewrite it to have a bit of a different focus, which is really what this book became. And so I felt a little rejected after that. I'm like, oh my gosh, I thought I'd have this wrapped up before the end of the year, but hey, at least I get to go to Vancouver to visit my family for the holidays. And then I got COVID. And that was my first time getting COVID, and my husband hadn't gotten it. And so I'm like, okay, I don't want you to get sick because this feels awful. Let's isolate from each other. And so I was basically on my own, isolated, or I think around. And so we had to also spend Christmas at home and not go back to Vancouver. And I was basically alone with my thoughts for 2 weeks. And that was something I hadn't done in a very long time. And so a lot of thoughts came to the surface of, why do I, what are some of these negative talking points that I would never tell a friend or a family member, because they're so nasty. But I, replay in my head over and over. And, what's really going on? And also, what am I doing with my life? Really, I hadn't had a point I felt like I was on the hamster wheel, just working, hustling, moving forward, trying to achieve whatever for years. And I hadn't really stopped to think about, where are we going and why? So that was a big shift for me. that made me really take a good look at myself and my life and everything it touched to see what's going on and what do we need to do so we we don't feel like this anymore, because this is not normal, this is not healthy. So that was a big moment, aha moment for me. Thank goodness that happened. And honestly, I got to kind of explore a lot of my thoughts and feelings while writing this book, because I couldn't just write it to be like, this is what you should do. I'm like, I have to do this work. And so the introduction in the first chapter, I had to write some pretty vulnerable things. Throughout the whole book, I really laid it out there, things I'd never shared with anybody, maybe say for my husband. And so yeah, writing down things was really a helpful point, me really discovering what's going on under the surface. And hopefully it'll allow people, me showing my vulnerability will allow people feeling more comfortable to do it themselves.
Did you feel like you weren't earning enough or managing your money properly?
Oh,
Or I know you
literally
mentioned,
everything.
yes. Okay.
Everything. I thought nothing I could do was good enough. I didn't think I was earning enough money. I'm earning enough money. I didn't think I was saving enough money or investing the right way, or, I should have a team. I'm still pretty much solo. I've got a few contractors for my business, but I don't have a full team, and I see lots of people growing like that. I should be traveling more. I should be just doing more, which is crazy because, when I did actually have a moment, and even now, 2 years later, my life hasn't really changed in terms of how I operate it and how much I earn. I pretty much earn, very similar to what I did 2 years ago. But I'm much happier and much more satisfied. And I think it's because I realized that I was looking at money as a means to make that negative self-talk go away, satisfy need. And yeah, I thought it would be the solution to all of my problems, but it never was. Sometimes it would actually be the issue. Money was actually the issue I was dealing with. And so I had to basically retrain myself to realize that money can solve money issues. It's not going to solve all my other issues. We need a different toolkit for that.
So what did you discover? So I know that you mentioned from now and then 2 years ago, basically your life from the outside looks the same, in terms of income and maybe expenses. But what did you uncover when you did? Why did you feel those things, and how did you stop yourself from being so hard on yourself and make those adjustments?
Well, ultimately, I really had to kind of look back into the past to find out, where did this all start? Because my memory being a child was I was very confident. I was very bubbly. I had a lot of energy. I had, I was a dreamer, and something shifted when I, became an adolescent and entered a few unhealthy friendships, I'd say. I wouldn't really call it bullying, because everyone has a different definition of that, but they were not very good friends to have, and I kept them around for way too long, and some of the things that they did or said, I internalized into, oh, something's wrong with me, instead of being like, maybe you should just not be around these people. And so because of that, I didn't realize until, again, doing some therapy and writing this book, that experience, that life experience that still affects me today, 20 years later, was actually a form of trauma. It's called little t trauma. When we think of trauma, we usually think of big T trauma, something really big and horrific, such as, abuse or a natural disaster or war or things like that, which are awful and can have a huge impact on your finances and your life. But there's also the little things that we often don't think are as important, or, oh, come on, get over it. It's been 20 years. Guess what? Trauma is just another word for emotional wound that you have not healed from. And I never healed from those experiences. I thought I should just get over them, brush them under the rug, and didn't realize that they were always impacting me. And yeah, part of the negative self-talk, I think, stemmed from that, me not feeling good enough or worthy or, things like that I continued. And I also talk about being the middle child in my family. My parents did an amazing job. They were young parents. They were very busy. And I can't imagine being in their shoes, but also being young, busy parents with 3 kids. Once my younger sister kind of came into the picture, and again, it's not her fault for being born, but my reaction to, okay, we have this baby and we have to put all this attention on this new child, is instead of asking for the attention I needed, I took a step back and just went into the background and stayed there, and did not realize I was doing that for so many different areas of my life. For example, I went to film school, and I used to, when I was a child, I always wanted to do acting. I'm a terrible actor, so it wouldn't have worked out anyway, but I had a real passion for that. I had a lot of fun doing that. And then when all these things happened, I eventually realized, no, I don't want to be in front of the camera. I want to be behind, like behind the camera, not even a camera operator or director. I want to be an editor. I want to be in a room all by myself, because I just took myself out of that situation and just, yeah. So there's a lot of things that happened to me growing up that impacted my career trajectory and just everything I've done. And then there was obviously a big shift too when I was in my young adulthood and started blogging. I realized, oh, I actually do want to be in front of the camera. And that's part of the reason I'm doing what I am today, which is weird to say, but because I love what I do, is I want that attention. So I want to be on camera. I want to have, people follow me, because I'm trying to fulfill this need that I was never able to fulfill growing up. And again, haven't worked through. So I didn't know how to, in a healthier way, achieve that, or, fulfill that need or heal that emotional wound.
Thank you for sharing that. I think there's so many points here that are so interesting.
Yeah, I'm like, I dumped a lot on you right now.
No, so. It's good. Okay, so here's the thing. I think I feel like I've said this, and most people maybe feel this in a way, but don't know yet. And hopefully this kind of reminds them that there's so many parts of our lives, our history, our childhood, are just the way we are based on how we were raised and grown up. And it's not anyone's fault. That's what I think about as a mom with 3 kids. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, you can't do it perfectly. Like, someone's going to think like that it was unfair or that you didn't do well. And so you can't like control their, reaction. You can try to do your best. But with that, as you were talking about, your friendship groups and not feeling maybe good enough, and, perhaps that is a way in which because you've been in this industry as an entrepreneur for a while now. So you have to have like pushed yourself, and, and so that feeling of not being good enough maybe propelled you to push yourself in ways.
I know that's the complicated part. Is part of it was like, it was holding me back, but another part of it was that was the fuel that kind of got me fired up to be like, well, I'm going to show you. And that worked for us, like, for a long time, until it stopped. Because that is not, you can't just live off of negative motivation. You need to have that positive, and that's what I was lacking.
So the little T also is very interesting to me, because I would say that probably also, I think we've all experienced, just like if you are like in this world, if there weren't any big T's, there have been little T's, just like little in life, all the time. Like, it's just, that's, I think, what life is. And so sometimes we don't, like you said, want to recognize it or give it like space, because then it's like, well, it could have been worse, and like other people have it harder, and who am I to complain? And so I feel like that sometimes about some of my experiences, but those little T's like totally impact the way we show up with our kids, family, partners, in our business, in our, like, what we see as opportunities. And I think if we can just like really like be introspective and like honest with ourselves about like what it is like that bothers us, or what we feel like at one point was helpful and now is no longer helpful, is like it will help to get us going in a more the direction that works best for us.
Yeah. And the one thing that I also realized that I wasn't doing was I was showing other people empathy, like, especially when you're like working with a client one-on-one, or just, everything that we do as educators is like, oh, I want to help you. And I wasn't doing that for myself. I wasn't showing myself any empathy. Like you might mention, I always would have the narrative of, well, people have it worse. You shouldn't be complaining. You're so privileged, all these things. And so I would not leave myself any space to recognize some of my own things that maybe I needed help with, or I needed to show up for myself. I would not even let myself go there, because I thought, well, I don't want to be selfish. I don't want to be this and that. And because of that, then guess what? You're not going to do. You're not going to heal. You're not going to be able to move forward in an actual healthy way. You're going to stay stuck in that situation and never allow yourself. You're going to basically be a victim to yourself, because you're not allowing yourself to be like, this happened and it hurt me and I'm not healed from it. And so, I'm going to continue this cycle of, this hamster wheel that's not going to help. So yeah, that's something I had to relearn and retrain myself, is to be empathetic towards myself, because I wasn't allowing myself to be.
So let's say you in the moment, or at that moment when you realize, okay, this is something, and I'm sure it's not just one moment, it's like a continuous like moments as you work through this, because I don't think the work ever ends.
No.
How did you, right. Like, how did how does one, like, especially if you don't realize this till later in life, let's just say like you are 40 and it took you 40 years to realize, oh, or to acknowledge like, oh, I do react this way, or I do have guards up, and this does impact how I interact with people and is holding me back. Even if you are able to recognize that, for some people, like changing at 40 or 30 it's hard, even at 20. Even my kids, I'm like, you're only 10 and I feel like you're already stuck in this pattern. So imagine like older people and they feel like, I can't. Like, how do you then retrain, rewire yourself to think and be different?
Yeah. I mean, I'm one of those people that I don't believe that you can self-heal yourself. Like, there's a lot of tools out there to help, but where I made the biggest shifts and changes was working with a professional. Of course, like I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a therapist, I don't have all of that information and those tools. And so I needed that a person outside of me who could who could hear me, really listen. Because you can talk to your partner and your friends, but you're not going to share everything because it's, you're like, well, I don't want to reveal everything. And so there's also things I shared with my therapist, and I'll kind of talk about that in a bit because I tried a few different forms of therapy, and that I never shared with anyone. And I'm like, oh, like even with myself, I was hiding it from myself. And so, just like with personal finance, there's a limit on what you can do on your own. There may be a point where you're like, I need someone to help me who is an expert in this field that can get me to that next level. And so that's what I found I needed. And even though I'd been seeing a therapist for years before that, but it was very kind of surface. I don't think we ever dived deep, and that was because of that specific form of therapy wasn't trauma related. It was really, I think I started seeing him because of maybe some anxiety and imposter syndrome and things like that. And so we never really dive deep into some of these other issues. And so for this book, I'm like, I definitely want to have a chapter on solutions, and therapy is going to be part of it. And I read this amazing book called The Body Keeps the Score, which is amazing, goes through all these different forms of therapy. And there's literally hundreds of forms of therapy out there, which is overwhelming. But there's a few I wanted to try just to see, like, how does this feel different than what I was doing? I was really just doing like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. And so the first one I did, I found a therapist in my city, and I'm like, okay, I'm just going to do a few sessions just so I can better describe it. But I didn't think I was going to like do a big deep dive and go through it. And so we did what's called EMDR, and I'm going to get this wrong. It's like eye rapid motion. No, I'm not gonna. EMDR is what it is. I can never remember the full acronym. But it's basically a way where you reprocess trauma.
Sorry, I found it.
Oh, yeah. Are you found? Okay, please.
Yes. Eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing.
Yeah, there's no way I would have remembered. But I'd seen it actually in a documentary. I'm like, oh, this is interesting, and it's becoming more popular. And so we did a few sessions of just talk therapy, and she asked me about my childhood and trauma, and I'd never actually talked about that with a therapist before. And so we started doing EMDR, and there's a couple different ways you could do it. She had an EMDR machine, which is basically a machine where you hold two things in your palms and they just buzz one after the other. So it's pulsing. And the idea behind it is it is going to stimulate both sides of your brain to help you reprocess your trauma. So as this pulsing is happening, she's asking you questions about your trauma so you can kind of re-experience it and talk through it, so maybe you can make a connection that you weren't able to. And we did that for a number of sessions, and that was incredibly helpful. And the other form of therapy that was another like breakthrough moment, and I love it, and it's not as well known, but I think it's going to be. It's called, oh gosh, now it's all about parts. Oh yeah, IFS, internal family systems. When you learn about it, at first it sounds super weird and woo-woo, because basically the therapist is a facilitator for you to talk to your parts. And the idea behind it, and there's a great book called No Bad Parts by the therapist who created this form of therapy. It's recognizing that we are all built in parts. So, sometimes you talk about, well, part of me wants to go out Saturday night, but part of me just wants to stay home. There's different parts of us. And so the idea is that if we experience something traumatic, if we have this internalized trauma we haven't healed from, then there are certain parts that are protecting that wounded part that are not allowing you to heal, move forward. And they're doing that because they're like, no, we don't want to get hurt again. And so, and there's like the manager, the firefighter, and then the kind of hurt part, or kind of the self. And so I did I did this, I would not recommend this, but I just did an hour and a half session, like a day before I was going to go home to visit my family. Would not recommend it, but I was on a time crunch because I honestly had like a month before I'd handed my manuscript. And we really kind of continued from the sessions I was doing with my EMDR therapist to kind of bridge the gap. And we were able to figure out what is my wounded part, who are the parts that are protecting it, and what do they do and how do they show up. And how they usually show up is like rage, anger, or just like, how dare you, just like there's certain triggers. If, someone emails me and they use a certain word, I'll be like, how dare you,
Right. Like, don't you know that is unacceptable?
Yeah, I'm like, and it's like, it's a totally fine word, but if I hear someone that says they use like collaborate, I'm like, absolutely not. And that's because part of, as I was, getting started in this business, a lot of people took advantage of my kindness and my time, and they would, let's collaborate, which means, can I take advantage of your time and not give you anything back? So that's why. So anyways, that's neither here nor there. But I was able to do this work and do this session. I've done a few sessions after that to really figure out what's going on so we can find that part and release it and allow it space to finally heal. And what's interesting is, and I'm not going to get emotional because I'm not a very emotional person. Like I'm very guarded with my emotions. But whenever I think about this moment in this session with this therapist, she asked me, okay, so we're talking to this wounded part. Tell me how old they are. And immediately, I didn't even think about it. I think I said 6 years old or 5 years old. And I'm like, oh my God, that's the age I was when my sister was born. And you're like, oh, that's when things really shifted and changed me. And I took that step back and I became a different person because I also had conversations with my mom and she's like, oh, you were so lively and bubbly when you were younger until your sister was born. And so I was able to make a lot of interesting connections for myself, trying out different forms of therapy that maybe are lesser known, but for me were like, this is what I needed. And so I explore those in the books just so people can know there's not just talk therapy out there. There's so many different forms that may be what you're missing because you just didn't know about it.
Right. I love that we just like explore some different types of therapy. And I know it might be different in Canada. I mean, I want to go back to the word collaborate, not to set you off. But so let's start with collaborate and then talking about like finding these sources. I know it's going to be different everywhere, but so let's just say back before you realized or you knew that the word was a trigger or words like that could be triggering to you, you probably reacted, you had these feelings about it. And I don't know if you reacted or like to those feelings like in the moment or responded to an email in a way, but like let's just say now you know, like you have a different thought process. What's the difference in how you react now?
I mean, now I think more self-aware of if I'm like not in this like space of like calmness and something makes me rageful, I will be like, whoa, we feel different than we were before this email or this word came into our lives. Why is that? What set you off? So I do take more time to recognize how I'm feeling and then take a step back. And I try my best to not respond, email or phone, just like keep to yourself, get back to that place of calmness so you can see things through that lens instead of just your rage lens. So I am more self-aware about that, thank goodness.
And I think what's important that you just said is not that the feelings go away.
No.
It's just that you manage it differently. Because sometimes I think what happens is sometimes we know like, oh, I shouldn't be, why am I reacting this way? Like, oh, that's not a nice way to think about someone or something. It's not their fault, but you still feel it. But then you feel bad about feeling it. I know. I shouldn't be feeling it.
Then it's a cycle of now I feel
You're like, oh, look. Right, like I'm not involved. Like, look at me. Like, and so that happens to me. I'm just like, like all right, like, why did I have that reaction? That wasn't nice. Like, even if I never even acted on it, I'm like, oh. Yeah. So, but it sounds like even if you have the reaction or have the thoughts or feelings, like it doesn't mean you're a bad person or that you're wrong. And I think that's important because as much as we talk about, like, I think some people think that the changed behavior or being evolved or healed means you don't feel those things at all anymore. You don't feel like that you're insecure or that you're not making enough money or all those things.
Yeah. No, right? Those feelings are there for a reason. I'll give you another example of something happened to me in the summer. That, again, it was an email that came into my inbox, and I immediately felt like disrespected and like, how dare they? And I was full of like, and I'm like, gosh, I really like I felt like, is this bad to feel this way? This is not normal. I think because my husband does not react with rage. He's very quiet and peaceful. But he has internalized anxiety. We all have our things. And so I booked another session with my IFS therapist to figure out what is this part that is so full of rage and gets like, like, I don't like that. I want this part to go away. And what we actually worked through in that session was she's like, well, this part isn't bad because there's no bad parts. Maybe it's telling you something and you're not listening, and that's why it gets really loud and very angry, because you're not paying attention to what is the message it's trying to convey to you. And ultimately the message is, well, we need to, we had this email that came in. We did not like what they said, and we felt that if we just said yes to what they were asking, then we'd be kind of steamrolled. I don't want to be a doormat anymore, because again, that goes back to some of my childhood traumas of feeling like I was a doormat. And so it was telling you to stand up for yourself, but you weren't really listening, and so that's why I got really loud. So it's not a bad part. You just need to listen. And I'm like, interesting. So that's why it is important for us to have those feelings. But yeah, I don't like any of that kind of advice that like, oh no, it's bad to feel rage. No, that's a natural feeling, and it's a subconscious. We don't, choose to be angry. It just happens. But we need to be more aware of how we're feeling, why we're feeling that, and what is the underlying message behind that feeling. So we can really listen and then do what it's trying to help us. It's probably trying to protect us or help us in some way.
Right. It's signaling to us maybe something like you need something, like, oh, okay.
You need something. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So for you, how did you go about finding like some of these like therapists or different types of therapists, and then costs? I think that comes up a lot for people where,
yes.
Like, how do you pay for it?
Yeah. So I talk about that in the book because I know there's a lot of talk about therapy, working with a professional, financial or for, mental health. And that's not free. I mean, there are some things in Canada where, depending on the situation, you may be able to have it covered by healthcare, but in general, not. Unfortunately, and even through your workplace, sometimes they offer benefits, but sometimes they're limited. I know someone who had a program through their work where they could, but they were limited to a certain number of sessions. And guess what? It is a practice. Like, you can't just like, oh, I'm cured after 8 sessions. No, you probably need more than that. And so I talk about how, if you are in a situation where you're like, I need some mental health help, I don't know where to start, but I also don't have that much money, I do talk about like, okay, here's some things that you can do right now just to better self-regulate your emotions so you don't let those emotions get you into a worse financial state. And here are ways to calm yourself down and all that kind of stuff, and some grounding techniques. So we start there. Next step is, okay, now we need to find the money to hire a professional. And ultimately, I give them my strategy for this is how I budget. This is how I work with clients so we can find the money. But, it's basically earn more, spend less, or do both. That's kind of the basic things. But if you do have a good budget, or a spending plan is the word I prefer to refer to it as, a lot of people don't like the term budget. It's very triggering for them. So spending plan, how you'd like to spend your money. There is probably somewhere in that maybe we could afford a session or two just to kind of get the ball rolling. And then as your mental health improves, you may find it easier to find a mechanism to make more money or to spend less in other areas, because you don't need alcohol anymore, because that was a self-soothing thing. We'd like to move that money and allocate it more towards therapy. And so we do talk a lot about that. But yeah, I do realize the cost of mental health, even though it is so important, can be very expensive. I don't have, besides our government healthcare, I don't have private healthcare. So when I see a therapist, I pay for it out of pocket, and I have to put that as a line item in my budget and save for it. So it's not easy. And that's one thing that I hope changes. I think more people will realize or governments will realize how important this is for our society to have more, healthier, happier mental health in our society. But that's a big ask.
Yeah, I mean, no, it's almost just like none of us can really execute and feel good, sustainably, and even if the bad feelings come up, without addressing like the internal things within us. Like, we all, like, there's something that's operating within us that, our mindset, our habits, all these things like this, our spirit, right? Like, that's causing us to do the things we do.
Yeah.
And so many of us, our spirits are wounded or hurt. And I'm just, feeling away. And it's so many, like, the factors of why and how that can be. And so until we can learn to address them. And like you said, I think like, I know you talked about if you don't have money and like some grounding techniques, but whether it is like, whether you pray or you meditate or you take a moment
Yes.
by yourself to take some deep breaths and some
Yeah.
breath work and all these things that until you can afford
Yeah.
help would be useful to so many people.
Yeah, because a lot of us never learned that stuff. Like I certainly didn't know how to what's called self-regulation. And I talk about in the book, there's a part where I go a little sciencey and talk about what's called polyvagal theory. And really it's the idea that there's this polyvagal ladder that we go up and down in terms of how we are emotional or non-emotional. And most of us want to be in this one state, which is just connectivity and calmness and peace. That's where we'd love to live. But typically, especially if we have trauma that we haven't dealt with, something will set us off, a trigger that will get us into fight or flight mode or freeze and fawn mode. And those are not happy places. And so when you learn to self-regulate and become more self-aware, it's easier for you to, after you get triggered, because there's no way to avoid getting triggered, unfortunately, or eventually it won't be as intense, but still something will happen. There's a way that you can learn how to get yourself back into that happy place of connection and peace. Whereas if you don't have any tools, you're going to live in fight or flight mode like all day because you're just like, I'm just so angry. Whereas now you can be like, oh, okay, I see what's going on. I was triggered by this. This is why it happened. Now I think I'm going to give myself a moment, maybe meditate, do some grounding techniques to calm myself down, and then get back into that place where I'm more logical and reasonable and happy and peaceful.
Mm-hmm. So with your journey now, I love that you kind of were working on yourself while working on the book.
Yeah.
I think for some people that can bring up some feelings in terms of, and I'm wondering if this happened for you, right? Like you are a subject matter expert. You've gone through training. You've been doing this for years and you're giving advice on these important topics. And then like you still, like we all are, working through your own stuff. Mm-hmm. And how did that feel for you doing that? Because I do think that is a sticking point for so many people that they feel like I should know better, or I should do this, or I should not, like, and then talk through that process of being able to be comfortable with being vulnerable with your audience, with people who are going to be reading the book.
Yeah, that was really scary. While I was writing it, I knew I needed to do it for my own peace and my own personal growth, but it was very scary because I'm like, I'm going to put out this book and very well people, because I'm already expecting, the worst to happen, because that still happens in my mind, that people will read it and be like, what the hell was this? I thought this was supposed to be about money. I thought you're a money expert. This is not what I bought. Or, oh my gosh, I can't believe she shared all that. That's so embarrassing. All those negative things. The thing is, I did not write my book for any of those trolls, those naysayers. And honestly, they're not going to pick up this book, but maybe they should because they'd probably learn a thing or two. I wrote this book for anyone who is in a very similar situation, who needs help, and they could not find a book like this. Because there's a lot of great personal finance books like yourself, like your great book. There's a lot of great psychology and mental health books. I couldn't find one that really bridged the gap that kind of talked about, hey, have you put those two pieces together to see how they connect? And so for me, my driving force of sharing and being vulnerable was I want to make other people feel seen and heard and feel like finally this is a book. And I've already, not to toot my own horn, but I have been getting some messages from people who've read it, and it's only been out for a week as we're recording this, being like, this is exactly what I needed to hear. And I'm like, oh my, that's exactly why I wrote the book, because I needed something like that. So I just thought, like, you know what, if people hate the book or people give me criticism, I honestly don't care, because I feel like this will still help somebody that was looking for this kind of help.
Yeah, I think that's important too, that you were able to basically bridge that gap, like find that those important intersections of money and psychology and, the root of what it is that we're looking to do. Because like you said, money is great. It's a great tool. Yeah. It's a great resource to have. Yeah. But ultimately, even if with all the money in the world, you can be miserable. And like that's the evidence of that with people who are wealthy and rich, whatever. Yeah. And you're like, their lives are just so like
Yeah,
right?
just because you are a billionaire does not mean that you can never be unhappy. And there's actually some studies I share in the book that show, because there's that, popular study that if you have, what is it, back in the day, $70,000, and that's your happiness number. Obviously, that number is very different now because I think that was like over a decade ago. But they actually made a new study that showed that actually more money could potentially increase your happiness, but what it cannot do is solve your unhappiness. If you're already unhappy, miserable, dealing with whatever, guess what? More money is not going to be the solution. So I think that's really important. Like if you're a miserable billionaire, another billion's not going to do anything.
Right,
So
right.
I've kind of come to a place that, okay, I've got my personal goals of where I feel comfortable and where I like to achieve. And sure, I'd love to retire early and all this stuff. But I no longer have this feeling that if I don't reach that target or that milestone by this age, that I'm a piece of crap. It's like, no, we have goals so we can, see how far we can go. And there's a lot of great things we can do with extra money. We can be charitable. We can help friends and family. We can be more secure in ourselves. That gives us just like less anxiety and all this stuff. Money is great, but it will not make you happier than if you're already dealing with a lot of crap and you're already miserable and unhappy. That's the mental health part that can come into play with that.
Yeah. What about your own like journey now? So the book is currently, it's out
Yeah.
and you've been doing this for a while now. How do you find or see your evolution as an entrepreneur in this space?
Yeah.
Because your book is out, and you've been talking about this, like some of these topics for a while now. I feel like this may be when you like dug more into the psychology part of it, maybe like a new like
It's a
lane.
departure for me. Yeah, it's definitely a different lane for me, which I'm excited. I was a bit nervous that people would be like, "Oh, this is a bit different," because I love just talking about money strategies and did you know this about this account type and this. I love talking about the practical how-to stuff because there's a lot of people that just need those answers. But I also wanted to then be that person that if you need something beyond that, I can also be that person to talk about it. So honestly, I haven't really thought too much about what's next or what this means or how this will shift my businesses. I honestly haven't thought about it that much just because I was just, let's focus on getting this book down and done and out into the world. But it'll be interesting to see kind of what this opens. I just hope this has the effect that it will, invite people to have more conversations about something that they maybe were too afraid to, and they'll pick up this book and then talk about it with a friend or a family member and just feel more open to that. That's really my main goal. But yeah, we'll see what happens. I have no clue. I haven't really thought that far ahead.
And I think too, just for the entrepreneurs or the will be or would be entrepreneurs out there that are thinking about starting, and sometimes I think, especially because I don't know, it's because we talk about personal finance, but I get a lot of people who, just like me, when I was first listening to podcasts, inspired by them. So I was like, oh, I'll start one. And then like you kind of find yourself with a personal finance business. And then, you're doing it for a while. And you're like, the things that I was excited about back then are not, honestly, it's not the same for me now. But when I do find something new that excites me, I'm like, oh, wow, like, here's that spark again. And there are so many new people coming upon our content that are like at the beginning stages where we were 7-10 years ago. So what advice would you give if they say, oh, well, like there's someone already talking about this, or there's a lot of blogs or podcasts or accounts out there, for them to start or keep going in case they're like struggling, what's something you want to tell them?
Oh gosh, yeah, that's a great question. I'd say that there's always someone out there already doing what you want to do, and they might be doing it better than you think you ever could do. And like when I started my podcast, I think I've shared this with you a while ago, I thought I was late to the party, and it was 2015. I'm like, there's too many podcasts. It's saturated. I don't know if anyone will listen to mine. Cut to 2025, 10 years later, I'm still doing it. And there's even more podcasts. Like literally, what celebrity doesn't have a podcast these days? Right? But I'd say you have to do things anyway. And that's the one thing that no matter what I've been through, I always did have this other voice that said, do it anyway. Do things that scare you, push yourself, take risks, because it's better and it's honestly better to have failed but tried than to have never tried at all, because you always wonder. And I never want to live my life with regret. And so just try the thing. If it doesn't work, then maybe there's just one element that didn't work, but you just have to pivot. Or maybe I've tried things and failed. I've had some business ideas that did not work out, that did not fly. that's okay. You have to try to find out that. So I'd say do it anyway. If you want to and you're passionate, I'd say like that's the big point. Actually, my husband, so he works in music and he's been doing it for as long as for like 20 years at this point now. And he's still obsessed with it. And my mom, who is like a career counselor at a high school, she's like, oh, I have a student who maybe I can connect you because he wants to do what you do. And Josh is like, sure, but I'm going to tell him what I tell everyone who's young, who wants to get into this business and they think they have an idea of it. If you are not obsessed with it, don't even bother, because you have to be so into it that you'll never get bored. And that is going to be the driving force, the energy you're going to use to continue. And I think for me, I always thought that my passion was filmmaking. That's why I went to film school. And then honestly, I fell out of love with it, realizing how difficult it is to be an artist and to have a good life and have financial security. And then when I discovered personal finance back in 2010, I've never stopped being obsessed with it. So that's what I would say. Find something that you're so excited about that you know you're never going to get bored with, and just try things out.
Yeah, I love that advice. I love that idea. And I think, too, for some people who are like, well, I don't know if I'm obsessed enough, that's okay, too.
That's okay, too.
Right. That's okay, too. I think that, I mean, don't bet your whole, unless you have a solid strategy.
Yeah.
And you have a backup plan, like I wouldn't necessarily quit my job to do
Oh my God,
something
no.
you're not
You know,
obsessed
I didn't.
with.
You know, I did
Right.
this thing on the side for 4 or 5 years while working full time.
Right.
And I tell people, never quit your job unless you have income coming in. You need that proof that you can actually make a living doing your passion. And I did that for a long time until I'm like, I can quit my job because I am making money finally. So let's see how this goes. But also, if this fails, I can get another job. I always had plan B, C, D.
Right, because you need that. And I think going back to the obsession part is that sometimes, like, you know, you might be into something. It might be stages or like seasons of your life that you are into something. And like, because I'm like this, right? Like I often think I get into things like, and I'm like, I'm really excited about it. Yeah. And then maybe after a couple of years, I'm like, I'm not as excited anymore. But my interest in that subject or topic propelled me or showed me a different path that has me here. So I also want to say to people who have not found what they're obsessed with, or maybe it's waning a bit, like in something they thought they would do, is that that's okay. Perhaps it's you know, you have to try the thing first, and then it led you to here, and then now you're able to maybe try something else or take some time to sit and think about what you want. So
and I'd say the other thing, I talk a little bit about this in the book on money and happiness. Figure out what you want to keep as a hobby just for pleasure, and what you want should this be a business. Because I feel like it still exists that you have a hobby. Did you know you can make money off that? Yeah, but do you need to? So figure out, no, I'm just doing this for pleasure and it makes me happy. Because honestly, once you turn something like that into a business, it does lose some of its sparkle, you know?
Oh my
so
gosh.
just keep some things for yourself.
This is so for me, like my kids, the boys play basketball.
Yeah.
And, you know, they're at that age. I mean, they're young. So, you know, but still, they're at that age, though, where there are some people within their group that are taking this very seriously.
Right.
Like, they're going for it. Like, their goal is, you know, college scholarships, MBA, all that. And, you know, we tell our kids, like, listen, you can still love basketball, but not be as competitive. Like, you can just play it to play it and have fun. Because I see that the commitment it's going to take to get you to that level, it's a lot. It's not for the weary
you have to be obsessed with it. It is your life. Like, no.
And then when you even get to those levels, it's work. It's like the work no one can push you anymore. You have to do it yourself. So it reminds me of that, where it's kind of like that hobby, like doing it for fun, like playing when you go outside, playing just, you know, in a league that's not as serious, versus I want to do this. And it's a lot to ask a kid to like make that decision now. So we're not like telling them they need to choose. But it just reminds me of that, because there is a bit of, but you don't have to. Don't feel like you have to take it so seriously now if you just want to like do it to have fun.
I know. I when I look back to like when I was a kid or even a teenager or young adult, there were so many things that I was just I feel like I was very serious in so many things. And so many times I'm like, no, this isn't just this is going to be my next thing. This is going to be my career. Everything I took kind of a step further. And I wish I sometimes just kept some of those things for fun. Like, you can enjoy acting and being in plays for school, you don't have to be an actor on TV shows, and go auditioning and things like that. So yeah, just that's one thing if I could go back in time, I wish I enjoyed myself more and didn't take things as seriously and didn't think that everything had to be, this is my golden ticket, this is the thing that's going to make me rich and famous and blah, blah, blah. Sometimes you can just have fun. Like I had the best time over the holidays doing a puzzle with my mom. It was one of the best moments we had. And we did not make any money, and it was a waste of time because we you already kind of know what it's going to look like because it's a puzzle, it's on the box. But it was joyful and it was fun. And, that's a big important thing, a piece that doesn't get talked about enough is just enjoying the little things.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So Jessica, please tell everyone more about your book, who should buy it and where they need to get it, and how they can follow you and get it.
Sure. Yeah. So it's called Everything But Money, The Hidden Barriers Between You and Financial Freedom. Best place to kind of find links for it. That was available everywhere, especially online. I don't know in the US where it is in bookstores physically, but you can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, everything online. And if you're in Canada, again, Indigo and all those kind of places. Bookshop.org in the US as well, though I think it's on back order right now. But if you go to jessicamoorhouse.com/book, that is where you can find more information about the book and some links and things like that. And really, this book is meant for if you're not looking for a practical how-to money book because you've read those and you're still looking for answers, then you may want to check out mine to find some different answers that you may not have ever thought about before. And just, do a little, especially around this time of year, the start of the year, doing some introspection is probably a great way to kind of kick off 2025.
I love that. I will link all that in the show notes, and then tell everyone your podcast and the social media handles again.
Yes. So I've got a podcast called The More Money Podcast, and I'm doing, because this is our 20th season, entering our 10-year anniversary in June. So I'm doing something a bit different, which is exciting. First couple of weeks of the season, I'm reading excerpts from my book so you can get an idea of what the audiobook is all about. Also, I narrate the audiobook. And then I'm doing kind of a re-listen season where I'm bringing back some of my favorite episodes from the past 10 years. So you can kind of take a listen to those. And so that's the More Money Podcast. And you can find me on Instagram at Jessica I. Moorhouse. I'm also on YouTube. I make YouTube videos just under my name, Jessica Moorhouse.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jessica, for coming back on the show.
Thanks for having me again. It was so much fun.